what is becoming clear to me by the day is that this diplomatic tension that exists between South Africa and the US is not just informed by certain issues that have been raised by stakeholders in our country. I think there is a broader dynamic at play here, and it speaks to maybe different agendas that both countries have globally. Where South Africa, on one hand, in my view, appears to be advancing a more inclusive, quote unquote, agenda globally, with focus on issues like climate change, inequality, taxing rich people globally. There's also a debt relief agenda as well. And America, on the other hand, appears to have serious differences with this kind of agenda. And this is why it has said, as you've noted, that South Africa mustn't push for a joint declaration. It will block any attempt by South Africa to push for some kind of consensus, really, in its absence. But onto my views on our agenda, which is around three pillars, as you've mentioned: equality, solidarity, and sustainability. In particular, on two things, which is global inequality and debt relief. But debt relief first, I'm right, which is something which Ramaphosa himself has said we will be pushing very much as we go into G20 in terms of restructuring debt, and things of the like. Now, I get that debt is a serious problem on the African continent. It really is a drag on many states and their economies. But what worries me is the question we aren't asking in this discussion is, why do we have a debt crisis in the first place? What makes African states run to the IMF and the World Bank in the first place to go and look for loans? And the answer to the question is fiscal mismanagement, one issue, one major issue, and corruption as well. At the Free Market Foundation, we have our Liberty First initiative. And a key pillar of our Liberty First initiative is limited government, which underscores the importance of fiscal discipline. Having a fiscally disciplined government that spends well, that spends within its means, doesn't spend beyond its means, and manages debt sustainably, and doesn't balloon our deficit as our own government in this country is doing. And that avoids a situation where you actually go to the World Bank and the IMF and you have to loan money. So what worries me is we're not hearing that. What we're hearing is the usual reflex to externalize the problem and to argue that the global financial system is somehow rigged against the African continent. And I think the real problem here is internal. And as Mbeki said many years ago, what needs to happen in Africa is we need to look internally. A critical self-assessment of the continent is necessary. What is going wrong? What are African states getting wrong? How can they adopt more sustainable spending habits that don't drive them to the IMF and the World Bank and don't land us in a position where we're now asking to be pardoned for debt? Why are you asking to be pardoned if you can't manage your own states properly internally? So that's debt relief. But moving on to the other issue, which is this obsession we have with global inequality. The gap between billionaires globally and the poor is too massive, and we now have to tax billionaires and impose all these taxes on them. Again, I don't think that inequality should be the main focus. The main focus here again should be on poverty. How do we address poverty? We should focus less on the fact that we have inequality and more on the fact that we have so many people globally who are living beyond the poverty line. Stop obsessing over the fact that, for example, one guy earns 20,000 rands and one guy earns 5,000 rands. Obsess over the fact that both people are earning something. They're both living above the poverty line. There's a need for us to frame empowerment in absolute terms, not relative terms. And closely tied to this obsession with inequality again is this idea that prosperity is something that only a few people can enjoy, and we can't all share in prosperity. One person's gain equals to another person's loss. And again, this is not true. Prosperity is something we can all share in. You can have billionaires, you can have rich people, and you can have other people as well who prosper alongside of them. We need to move away from this idea that prosperity is something which is only shared by a few people. So I think those really are some of my thoughts around our co-agenda at the G20. I think it is an agenda really in the broader scheme of things that doesn't begin to address what I believe are the real issues in our own country, but Africa broadly. We will only begin to make progress on the continent once we realize that many of our issues are internal, they are caused by internal factors, and we need to address them internally and avoid a situation where we externalize them. I think those are just my initial thoughts before we get to other things like cleaning Santon up and all those things.